ilerilere gitme, böyle can damarları içinde dolaşma. Ve sonra eğer dönüp gelmeyecekse yara alınmadan, hissedilmeden dönüp geriye gelme meselesi. Geleceğimiz adına çok önemli esaslardır. Türkiye'deki devlet yapısı ölçüsüne göre bütün anayasal müesseselerdeki güç ve kuvveti cephenize çekeceğiniz ana kadar her adım erken sayılır.
I'm looking into an organization called Hizmet, also known as the Gulen Network. To their supporters, they're the face of moderate Islam, dedicated to building bridges between faiths and promoting science-based education. But their opponents accuse them of building a multi-billion-dollar network of fraudulent schools and businesses, of buying political influence through corruption, and even of being responsible for a bloody coup attempt in Turkey. In our investigation so far, we've discovered a network that operates in more than 100 countries worldwide. But in each place, it seems the modus operandi remains the same. There is an unusually high level of secrecy. They're in the business of opening schools that often attract the elites of society and also offer scholarships to gifted poorer children. And in many countries, they enjoy influential support, which makes life very difficult for those who speak out against them. Naturally, the idea of a group of religious educators plotting to take over a government seems far-fetched. But in Turkey, it's a matter of public record. This country of 80 million people is a melting pot of faiths and ethnicities that divide or bridge East and West. But currently, the majority of Turks now seem to agree on one thing. They say Fethullah Gulen's network is a threat to the country's democracy. They say his followers spent decades infiltrating the police, the armed forces, and the justice system in the country. And now they say his network was behind a July event in 2016 that almost toppled the government.
Well, in one of his interviews, he said they're claiming that I want to control Turkey. What is Turkey? Turkey is too small for me. I have schools and students everywhere. Ours is a global mission. So the guy wanted to be the ruler of the world, I guess.
They thought they could take over. They thought that Turkey in 2016 was the same as Turkey in 1960, when a group of 40 officers did take over. But Turkey today is much, much more complicated, sophisticated country than that.
In Istanbul, a group of soldiers rolled tanks onto the main bridge linking Asia with Europe. They occupied television stations and took over the city's main airport.
The TVs were putting flash news saying that the gendarmerie forces had closed the first bridge with one side, which kind of was awkward to me at least, because gendarmerie has no jurisdiction in Istanbul. And then I said, I don't know, maybe something is going on. There's some kind of an exercise. And then I started getting phone calls from Ankara, which is where I was headed to, saying that there were some F-16s flying by very low in the city, or within the outskirts of the city, which was also weird, because why would they fly, you know, that close at that hour of night?
Emniyet binasını vurun. Emniyet binasını tahrip edin. Anlaşıldı. Çatışma olan bölgeye atış yapıyoruz. Mutabık mıyız? Tamamıyla mutabık. Emniyet binasına atış yapın. Emniyet binası.
The coup plotters planned to take over Turkey's two main cities, Istanbul and Ankara, with the help of friendly elements within the military. But they needed to win the support of the head of the army, Hulusi Akar.
They then told him they expected him to go on television and to announce a coup d'etat. In other words, it depicts that they expected Hulusi Akar to lead the coup, although they had no evidence to support that idea at all. Well, he absolutely refused, so what were they going to do?
How much pressure was being put on General Akar?
According to his statement, they tied his belt round his neck, and he was actually hurt by this and tied him up, gagged and bound. They couldn't really do anything else. They couldn't kill him, clearly not. So they were in a bind.
Did they suggest that he communicate?
Yes, there was one point actually at which one of the plotters suggested to him that he should telephone Kولن in the United States to confirm that they were in favor of the coup.
Our own warplanes bombed our own parliament 11 times that night. Those were not the warplanes of enemy countries. Those were the planes bought by the people of Turkey with their taxpayers, with their savings, and those planes bombed the people who paid for them.
Adel Oksuz is the man Turkish authorities say organized the coup attempt. CCTV footage shows him making multiple trips between Turkey and the United States in the run-up to July 15th. It is he who is accused of carrying out the orders of his friend Fethullah Gulen.
Adel Oksuz, who was Gulen's right-hand man, was in the United States 2 days before the coup. He flew literally dozens of times back and forth to communicate with Gulen. His videotape coming into the airport in Istanbul, and then was photographed 2 days later giving orders at the Ikinci Air Base in Ankara, where the coup plotters' headquarters were and where the chief of staff of the Turkish military and other top-ranking generals were held as hostages. So, that's more evidence against Gulen than existed against Osama bin Laden in relation to the 9/11 operations, which the US used, of course, to justify the invasion of Afghanistan once the Taliban refused to turn Mr. bin Laden over. So this is a situation now that we have with Fethullah Gulen.
It was prepared through outside money and outside powers. It had a very strong domestic element. There was a very strong element of the army in the loop of the coup. It had been prepared for some time. It was a major coup. And the reactions to the coup had also been pre-prepared.
I mean, this was a poor planning. It was beyond their scope, beyond their capacity. As a military people, I can count 20 mistakes made by FETÖ coup d'etat operation.
So this was basically their last chance to do something. Otherwise, they would lose all power effectively. And so they decided on the disastrous option of overthrowing the Turkish government by launching a coup before their top leaders were purged.
Recently, new information has come to light regarding the extent of the coup plotting, how it was funded, and that link back to Salisbury, Pennsylvania. As we spoke to more people, one name that kept coming up was a Palestinian called Mohammed Dahlan.
What we know about the connections between Dahlan and Gulen, a full story is still to be revealed, but we know money passed hands, we know it was through a Palestinian intermediary in the States, and we know that messages passed as well. Now, my sources came from Turkish intelligence and also from inside the Emirati elite.
There is evidence that money went from the UAE via Mohammed Dahlan to support Gulen and the coup attempt. And certainly these countries, as a coup seemed to be succeeding or was underway, they were all very enthusiastic and celebrating until it fell apart.
The money came specifically from the Emiratis. Dakhlan was the bag carrier and he was the message carrier, and it went straight to Turkey and to forces within Turkey.
There were planes and helicopter gunship shooting.
Former Turkish ambassador to Germany, Hüseyin Kaşioglu, finds it painful to relive that night. He went out to protest and found himself on the receiving end of a sniper's bullet.
But this cafe became your meeting point.
This cafe became our meeting point because it's the closest place to the way to the parliament, because we wanted to defend our parliament, the shrine, the holy place of democracy. For us, it was important to go to the parliament, to sit in front of the parliament, to hinder the tanks. They could smash us in a second, but if there would be many tanks, they would stop at one point. So we were determined to do that. This was the trouser I wore at that time. The bullet went in from here, through here, and went out somewhere here. It's sad, but that's
It's
what
sad,
it
but
is.
it's something. Yeah.
That's
Thank you. Thank you. That's all right. It's good that we're talking.
sad. The night I was at the hospital was the terrific part. When I was shot, I didn't feel anything. Other people saw me. I felt dry in my mouth all of a sudden, and I was wondering why. Because I was not in fear, I was not in any bad condition. I was proud to be there with other people shouting, so another young lady being shot, another man next to me, because they were shooting indiscriminately from a vehicle in front of the general staff. So how come that my mouth is dry? So then I sat on the ground, and some other people took me all of a sudden from my arms and said, because I was bleeding. I didn't realize I was bleeding from the bullet hole which went out. But the democracy was a bigger issue of our future, of our generations, of our kids, our grandchildren. So, and if they should prevail, this dictator or this military people, I mean, what would expect us in the coming 20, 30, 40 years? What kind of country would be? A marionette of other powers.
How do you plan, in secret, to topple a government and take over a society? There was nothing spontaneous about the events of July 15th. It now seems clear that this coup attempt was global. It was well funded, and a good number of people knew it was coming. Indeed, in the months preceding the coup, a number of opinion pieces started appearing in American newspapers, criticizing Turkey's government and even appearing to encourage would-be coup plotters.
Editorials started appearing by Michael Rubin of the American Enterprise Institute, John Hanna, who was an aide, high-ranking aide to Dick Cheney, who works now for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, started speculating and advocating, actually, a coup against the Turkish government. But there's strong indications that the Gulenists were encouraged by others, weren't just operating on their own, but did have support.
What would have happened if the coup had succeeded? The American reaction would have been a deathly silence. And for about 3 hours, John Kerry, to his inordinate and lasting shame, started talking about, the importance of stability and continuity.
I hope there will be stability and peace and continuity within Turkey.
He didn't mention the dreaded democracy word once. This is exactly what happened in Egypt. The same characters were involved, the same sort of money was involved, the same sort of planning was involved. In Egypt succeeded, in Turkey it didn't.
I think a lot of the national media is so antagonistic toward Erdogan and the sort of the political machine that is Turkey right now, that they just don't want to listen to it. They don't want to hear it.
There's a lot of fake news about Turkey. There's a lot of fake news about the country. There's a lot of fake news about the government. We live in a very superficial news cycle here where the BBC, I would argue, the BBC gives a very one-sided, a very distorted and a very highly opinionated understanding, not just of Turkey, but the whole of the Middle East.
And I've said too, I said, look, hundreds of people were killed. This is a real thing. This is a democratically elected government. There was an attempted overthrow. I've seen the bullet holes. I was in Turkey 3 or 4 days before the coup, walking the same streets where then on the international news feed I saw tanks and other things, and they don't want to hear it. Erdogan locks up journalists. Why do we care about anything other than going after that story? All right, fine. Are they really journalists? That's not, he's suppressing speech. Maybe, I don't know. You're not very educated about Turkey, so why are you,
It's a lack of understanding of Turkish politics, quite frankly. If I might say so, I don't hold the media entirely innocent in this respect. I think one of the problems, if I may speak frankly, is that far too many journalists go in who don't speak the language, who don't know about the history and the culture, go there for a week and talk to people. And the people they talk to are basically English-speaking urban elite. And a high proportion of these are likely to be highly critical of Erdogan, which they're perfectly entitled to be, but they don't necessarily represent public opinion. If you don't speak Turkish, if you don't go out into the country, if you don't interview people in small towns and villages, in this country of almost 80 million people, you're not going to be able to give a fair picture of what's going on. You wouldn't consider going to France without speaking a word of French, spend a week there in Paris, and then come back with pontifical statements about French politics, would you? But people do that in Turkey, I'm afraid to say.
Turks accuse Fethullah Gulen's network of building a parallel state. They say his followers infiltrated the military, the police, and the justice system in Turkey and other countries over many years. And that they had support from people in high places around the world, politicians, educators, and policymakers, from the US to Europe and Africa. But to what end?
What he tried in July 15th of 2016 in Turkey, taking over the government, he would come back to Turkey like Khomeini went back to Iran. That was his biggest dream. And he would be the spiritual leader. And then he would try to organize similar coups in different countries where his followers would end up gaining the control, and he would be the global leader of this kingdom that he wanted to achieve.
You look at the Gulen movement with their PACs. They're the #1 political action committees in the United States. Our lobby wants to help you. We're going to give you money.
The Clinton campaign has received over millions of dollars, anywhere from some estimates of $1 million to $3 million of campaign contributions from the Gulen movement. Do your due diligence. All you have to do is just do homework. This cult movement has taken over the world by using a pen, paper, and influence.
You know, it is this confluence of different things that gives a criminal group with political aspirations a place to reside, make money, be criminal about it, and get away with it. And nobody wants to do anything about it.
As the dust settled after the bloodiest night in Turkey's modern history, the government found itself with an even bigger problem. The so-called parallel state and its true intentions had revealed itself. Turkey's institutions were in chaos. Could Ankara forgive and forget, or punish the plotters?
We have to realize that the vast majority of Turkish society sees him as the culprit for what has been occurring in Turkish society in the past 10 years.
There was a lot of criticism towards the Turkish government at the time of the coup, the attempted coup, and immediately afterwards. What I think a lot of British citizens need to understand is the huge number of loss of life in trying to undermine and, at the point of a gun, get rid of a democratically elected government.
During this investigation, we contacted members of the Gulen network to ask them to give an account of their organization. All of them declined. But we managed to track down 2 former senior Gulenists turned whistleblowers who agreed to talk to us. What they told us lifted the lid on how and why this secretive network operates.
Ben örgüte 17 yaşında girdim. Lise son sınıfta. Bulunduğum okuldaki sınıf arkadaşlarımın yardımıyla, yani onların tavsiyesiyle.
Şimdi örgüt içerisindeki yapılanmaya göre herkesin bir abisi var. Bu en alttan en üste kadar herkesin geçerli. Bir saygı ve düzen içerisinde olur. Abinin verdiği talimatlar koşulsuz olarak yerine getirilir. Yani bir bölge, bir ev abisi varsa onun üzerinde bölge abisi, o bölgenin üstünde büyük bölge abisi, onun üzerinde il abisi, onun üzerinde büyük yani birkaç ilin toplandığı büyük bölgeler vardır ve onun üzerinde de işte Türkiye abisi.
After the 2016 coup attempt, Turkey's government declared Fethullah Gulen's network a terror organization. Here the group is known as FETÖ. Turkey has vowed to expel so-called FETÖ members from public institutions.
FETÖ terör örgütü geçmişi 40 yılın üzerinde bir zamana yayılan ve Türk tarihinde karşılaşılan en ciddi terör örgütü. Dünyada benzerleri çok az. Yıllar itibariyle insanlarımızın inançlarını, temiz duygularını sömürerek bu kadar gelişebilmiş gizli bir örgüt.
Öncesinden bildiğiniz için altyapıyı, çoğu cemaatte bir düstur vardır. İtaat et kurtul, sorgulama. Sorgulama çok fazla yoktur örgüt içerisinde. Ve çok fazla sorgulayanı da sevmezler, hoş bakmazlar. Çok fazla sorgulamazlar. Eğer bir şey bize söyleniyorsa bir bildikleri vardır.
Olmuyor. Yani sizi her alanda, çünkü işinize olsun, eşinize kadar her yere sirayet ediyorlar. Evleneceğiniz kişiye kadar belirledikleri için öyle ben bırakıyorum, bıraktım, bittim diyemiyorsunuz. Bir taraftan bırakmaya kalktığınızda size ya eşiniz tarafından ya aileniz tarafından ya da işiniz tarafından tehdite maruz kalıyorsunuz.
İşte hani dediğim gibi bir faunusun içinde olduğumuz için bizden uzaklaşacaklar. İşte bizde artık irtibatı kesecekler. Bu büyük bir korkuydu benim için. Ve ben bunu göze alamıyordum açıkçası. 15 Temmuz darbe girişiminden sonra çok uzun zaman hayır, yapılamaz böyle bir şey. Olmaz zaten çok düşündüm. Ta ki işin içine girdiğimde hakikaten bazı şeylerin bu işte hani emniyet aşaması olsun, savcılık aşaması olsun, buralarda delilli, ispatlı şeyler görene kadar.
Turkey plays a strange role in modern geopolitics. Like so many Western countries, it too has had its days of empire, and like Western countries, resents the loss of influence in the modern world. But its role is in fact crucial, and the power politics driving that we underestimate at our peril.
In the last 100 years, the West has always disappointed Turkey. That's the sad part.
That's interesting. It's like the West feels that Turkey has always been a disappointment, but actually to the Turks, the West has been a disappointment.
Because Turks have tried their best. I mean, Turks tried, and actually, believe it or not, they're still trying, and never good enough. But also, what has happened in the last decade around the world just discouraged Turks that they will never accept us. You expect your friends and allies to just do something for a democratically elected government, whether you agree politically or not. When parliament gets bombed, you can tell that this is not just a regular coup d'etat. This is, again, no coup d'etat is permissible or forgivable, but bombing the parliament is, why would you bomb a parliament? Because the idea was to instigate a civil war and a massacre. Turkish people were alone in the streets with their bare hands versus the tanks, versus the F-16s, versus the helicopter gunships.
Turkey's wide-ranging crackdown on the Gulen network has flattened the organization at home. Ankara has tried to persuade other countries around the world to shut down Gulen-linked schools and businesses.
The movement is still there, but one thing you have to understand is that there's very little support for the movement anymore in Turkey, across the board, from left to right. The Turkish public is very aware of what the Gulenists were doing in the country, and there's very negative perceptions.
He is probably the most hated person in Turkey. No one has any sympathy for him in Turkey. The Western media and the Western leaders, however, see him as you mentioned, a man of religion, but he's a man of terror. He's responsible for many lives that were lost. He is responsible for putting an end to the dreams of millions of families in Turkey because he betrayed them.
The academics who study Fethullah Gulen's movement say this must have damaged their income stream from their global activities. But in some countries, the network continues its lobbying and public relations efforts.
The Gulen movement had hired a very well-known PR firm called Burst & Marsteller, who in turn had hired Karen W. Hughes, the former press secretary to George W. Bush, the President of the United States. And she effectively went around as the figurehead for this particular lobbying situation. PR and marketing and manipulating the public, if you might call it, has been something that they've used very adroitly here in the United States. The Gulen movement has used that to advance their goals, political goals, financial goals, power goals.
In the United States, multiple demands for Fethullah Gulen to be extradited have been ignored, something that has caused considerable anger and frustration in the Turkish government.
The presence in the States itself had created this diplomatic crisis with Turkey, because you could imagine if a NATO ally had safeguarded a movement which attempted to overthrow democratically elected governments in London or in Washington, D.C., and the leader of that group was sitting there.
In January 2019, a delegation of American officials, including members of the FBI, traveled to Turkey to discuss the case against Gulen. But so far, no extradition proceedings have been started. It was time to return to America, where we'd managed to unearth some documents from Gulen's residency application in a Philadelphia courthouse. After he fled Turkey back in 1999, he was given US residency in 2002. The legal battle had been lengthy, clearly expensive, but in the end, the Turkish cleric managed to recruit some influential local support.
He did get awarded a visa.
He did.
Yeah.
He did, a special status. So the American government, you can say suspiciously is complicit in harboring him.
And the application, of course, was supported by Morton Abramowitz, who was the former ambassador to the U.S., as well as George Fides and Graham Fuller, who were analysts with the CIA. So there's been a lot of speculation in Turkey about this connection.
Anytime we try to apply to bring a relative over from Turkey to here, not alone, forget about a CIA agent signing my relative's immigration documents, I can't even get my local congressman to give him a letter of support. But how is it Graham Fuller, an ex-CIA agent, signs some documents of support for Fethullah Gulen? How is that possible?
The head of this organization is notoriously difficult to reach. Our attempts by email and phone got us nowhere. So in the end, we decided to simply go up to the front door.
Hi, how you doing? Sorry? Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
The private security there was armed and extremely jumpy at first. There was a clear closed doors policy, so instead I decided to reconnect with our local guide, John Favre.
Should we go down here and take a look?
Well, we could go a little bit, but we don't want to be on their property. You know,
Do we know where their property is?
I don't really have a line, but I would say it's very close to, like maybe right here. I wouldn't suggest going any further down. As you see people walking right there. Just keep in mind, you're being watched. The cameras are all over. No religious figure in the world, as far as I know, has armed guards to protect this imam that didn't even graduate from high school. How can a person so powerful and have small education is unbelievable.
Maybe he's a man of God.
Yes, that's true, because they believe he's the God. My God is up there, but their God is there. They will do anything for him. If things go bad, they will protect him. He is the God.
Right now, the Gulen network in the United States looks to still be operating with considerable support and without much fear of its opponents. In Europe, hundreds of Gulen schools and businesses are still operational, with Germany the most significant. The German authorities have resisted Turkish demands to hand over suspects who fled there after the coup. In Africa and elsewhere, the network's capacity to make money seems undiminished.
Terrorism comes in very different formats. The images that we know of bombs and machine guns, that type of movement is over with terrorists. Today, terrorism is being implemented by a stroke of a pen on a piece of paper and with influence.
I think there's some people who think that it's too big to fight. Yeah. You know what, we need to get together and we can make change, we can do this.
It makes you wonder why we continue to allow a group that has broken our laws in many occasions, has influenced our political class, and is still operating in a way as an enemy of a friendly nation. Why are we willing to risk that relationship to protect, let's say, an Islamic cult? Why are we allowing this? What is going on? What is the thought process? I don't have a good answer to that right now.
The Gulenists are, for sake of a better metaphor, the Scientologists of Turkey. They're really truly outliers who are trying to undermine the majority in Turkey.
Is our government working as an ostrich with their head in the sand? and hoping everything will work out, or they're really investigating some of this stuff and trying to find out what is this guy all about. Is he a threat to the United States?
It's clear the network that was has been radically reduced since the 2016 coup attempt. But it's equally clear that in many countries around the world it remains, highly organized with considerable resources, protecting an extremely effective business structure. The influence of this Turkish cleric is still felt from the Pocono Hills to hundreds of countries around the globe. His opponents still accuse him of mass murder, trying to topple a government, and fraud and corruption. A battle not apparent at the peaceful compound at Chestnut Grove.